I'm Camille Kensington, 32 years old, and I used to believe that marriage meant having someone in your corner no matter what. Until the night my husband chose his family's approval over my dignity at his sister's wedding, and I decided to give him a surprise he'd never forget. Let me start by saying I never wanted to be that woman. You know the one. The wife who makes ultimatums, who demands to be chosen, who turns family gatherings into battlegrounds. But sometimes life has a way of pushing you into corners you never thought you'd find yourself in. And sometimes the people you trust most are the ones holding the knife. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Camille, and I've been married to Mario Santos for 6 years. 6 years of what I thought was building a life together, creating a partnership, becoming a team. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, a place where people value authenticity and directness, where we say what we mean and mean what we say. Mario grew up here in Miami, in a tight-knit Cuban-American family, where family loyalty isn't just expected, it's demanded, and where outsiders, even those who marry in, are constantly proving their worth. When we met at a medical conference, 7 years ago, I was completing my residency in pediatric surgery, and he was finishing his fellowship in cardiology. We were both ambitious, driven, focused on our careers. I fell in love with his passion for his work, his dedication to his patients, and what I thought was his fierce loyalty to the people he cared about. What I didn't realize then was that his loyalty had a hierarchy, and I would never be at the top of it. The Santos family is intense. Mario's mother, Elsie, is the kind of woman who runs her household like a general runs an army. Everything has its place, everyone has their role, and deviation from the established order is not tolerated. Mario's father, Louis, is quieter but equally set in his ways. A successful businessman who built a small empire of auto repair shops across South Florida. They have 3 children, Mario, who at 34 is the eldest and the golden boy, his sister Marion, 29, who works in the family business and has always been the princess, and their youngest, Henry, 26, who's still finding his way but can do no wrong in their eyes. From the beginning, I could sense the undercurrent. I wasn't Cuban. I wasn't Catholic. I wasn't from Miami. I didn't speak perfect Spanish, despite my best efforts to learn. I was a career woman who worked long hours and couldn't always make it to every family gathering. In their eyes, I was taking their precious son away from where he belonged. But Mario and I were in love, or so I thought. He proposed after 2 years of dating, and despite the lukewarm reception from his family, I said yes. I believed that love would be enough, that time would soften their resistance, that once they got to know the real me, they'd see that I made their son happy. Our wedding was complicated. I wanted something small and intimate. Elsie wanted a production. We compromised, which in Santos family terms meant we did exactly what Elsie wanted but pretended I had input. 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. A reception that felt more like a business networking event than a celebration of love. But Mario seemed happy, and I told myself that's what mattered. The early years of our marriage were good, despite the family tensions. We bought a beautiful house in Coral Gables. Both of our careers were taking off, and we talked about starting a family. Mario would occasionally choose his family over me in small ways, canceling our plans for impromptu family dinners, taking their side in minor disagreements, making decisions about our life without consulting me first. But I rationalized. Family is important, I told myself. He's just maintaining the peace. But over time, the small concessions became bigger ones. When we were house hunting, Elsie insisted we needed to be within 20 minutes of the family home for Sunday dinners. When I got offered a position at a prestigious children's hospital in Houston, Mario didn't even consider it because we couldn't leave the family. When we started trying for children and faced some fertility challenges, Elsie made it clear she thought it was my fault, my age, my stress, my career focus. Through it all, Mario played the role of the dutiful son. In private, he'd sometimes acknowledge that his mother could be overwhelming, that his family didn't always treat me fairly. But in public, in front of them, he was a different person. He was their Mario, not my husband. And slowly, I began to feel like a stranger in my own marriage. The breaking point came 6 months ago at Marion's engagement party. After a few drinks, Elsie made a comment about how some women prioritize their careers over family, and how lucky Marion was to find a man who appreciated traditional values. It was clearly directed at me, in a room full of family and friends. I looked at Mario, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend me. Instead, he changed the subject to the upcoming wedding plans. That night, I confronted him. I told him I couldn't keep living this way, constantly feeling diminished and unsupported in his family. He promised things would change. He swore that at Marion's wedding, things would be different. He'd make sure I felt included, valued, respected. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. Marion's wedding was set for a Saturday evening in October, at the Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables, a grand affair befitting the Santos family princess. I spent weeks preparing. I bought the perfect dress, had my hair done professionally, even practiced small talk in Spanish with my colleague who offered to help. I was determined to make this work, to finally find my place in this family. I had no idea that this wedding would become the night I finally stopped trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. I had no idea that by the end of the evening, I'd be walking away from everything I thought I wanted, carrying a secret that would change both our lives forever. Because sometimes, the most important moments in your life don't announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as just another family gathering, just another opportunity to prove yourself worthy of love you should never have had to earn in the first place. And sometimes, the person you've been trying so hard to become isn't who you're meant to be at all. To understand what happened at Marion's wedding, you need to understand the Santos family dynamics. They operate like a small kingdom, with Louis as the quiet but powerful king, and Elsie as the queen, who actually runs everything. In this kingdom, there are citizens and there are subjects, and from day one, it was clear which category I fell into. Mario wasn't always the man who would eventually betray me in front of a room full of people. When we first met at that medical conference in New Orleans, he was confident but not arrogant, family-oriented but not blindly loyal. He talked about his family with love, not worship. He seemed like a man who could think for himself, make his own decisions, chart his own course. But I learned quickly that there's a difference between Mario the individual and Mario the Santos son. The moment we stepped into that family home, for the first time I watched him transform. His posture changed, more deferential. His voice changed, softer, more careful. Even his laugh changed, becoming this nervous thing I'd never heard before. The Santos compound, as I came to think of it, was a sprawling Mediterranean-style house in Pinecrest, complete with a guest house, pool, and outdoor kitchen that could cater a small wedding. This was where the family gathered every Sunday after church, where all major decisions were made, where the hierarchy was established and reinforced week after week. Elsie Santos was born in Cuba, but came to Miami as a child. She built her identity around preserving tradition, maintaining culture, and protecting her family from what she saw as the corrupting influences of American individualism. She was beautiful in that polished, controlled way that some women perfect. Never a hair out of place, never a wrinkle in her clothing, never an unguarded moment. But her beauty was cold, calculated. She wielded it like a weapon, along with her sharp tongue and her ability to make you feel like an outsider with just a look. Louis was different, but equally challenging in his own way. Where Elsie was fire, he was ice, a successful businessman, who'd built Santos Automotive from a single garage into a chain of 15 locations across South Florida. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He was respected in the community, feared by his employees, and worshipped by his children. He didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. A slight nod from Louis could end a conversation. A raised eyebrow could change the direction of a family gathering. Their children reflected these dynamics perfectly. Mario, as the eldest, carried the weight of being the heir apparent. He was expected to be successful, responsible, and above all, loyal. Marian, the only daughter, was simultaneously protected and pressured, expected to be the perfect representation of Santos family values, while also being tough enough to work in the family business. Henry, the baby, got away with things his siblings never could, but also lived with the constant pressure of living up to his older brother's accomplishments. From my first Sunday dinner, I could feel the assessment happening. Elsie would ask seemingly innocent questions about my family background, my career goals, my thoughts on children and marriage. Louis would observe quietly, filing away information for later use. Marian would be politely interested but distant, and Henry would try to lighten the mood with jokes that somehow always seemed to highlight how different I was from them. Mario, caught in the middle, would try to navigate these interactions like a diplomat at a peace summit. He'd redirect uncomfortable questions, change the subject when tensions rose, and afterwards, he'd reassure me that they just needed time to get to know me. "They're protective," he'd say. "Once they see how much I love you, they'll come around." But they never came around. If anything, they became more subtle in their exclusion, more sophisticated in their undermining. Elsie would plan family events on dates when she knew I was working, then act surprised when I couldn't attend. Louis would discuss business matters with Mario in rapid Spanish, excluding me completely even though I was sitting right there. Marian would share inside jokes and childhood memories, creating an atmosphere where I was constantly reminded that I would never truly belong. The worst part wasn't the overt hostility. I could have handled that. The worst part was the way they made me complicit in my own exclusion. They were so careful, so polite, so seemingly welcoming on the surface that questioning their behavior made me feel paranoid, ungrateful, dramatic. When I tried to talk to Mario about feeling left out, he'd point to all the times they'd included me, all the family events I'd been invited to, all the ways they'd tried to make me feel welcome. What I didn't understand then was that this was the strategy. Make the outsider feel crazy for feeling like an outsider. Make them question their own perceptions. Make them grateful for scraps of inclusion while starving them of genuine acceptance. The pattern escalated after our wedding. Suddenly, every family gathering became an opportunity to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. Elsie would make comments about how different traditions were in my family. Louis would ask pointed questions about my career that somehow always ended with implications that I was prioritizing work over family. Marian would share stories about other family members, wives who had adapted better to Santos family life, and Mario became their enabler. He stopped defending me, stopped redirecting uncomfortable conversations, stopped acknowledging that anything problematic was even happening. He'd laugh along with jokes at my expense, nod in agreement when his mother made cutting observations about my choices, and afterwards he'd tell me I was being too sensitive. The most insidious part was how they made me believe that earning their acceptance was possible. There was always something I could do better, some way I could prove myself more worthy. If I just learned more Spanish, if I just attended more family functions, if I just showed more interest in their traditions, if I just made myself smaller and more accommodating, then maybe finally I'd be accepted. I spent 6 years chasing that acceptance, not realizing that it was never actually on the table. The seeds of what would eventually destroy my marriage were planted long before I even knew the Santos family existed. To understand how deep their resistance to me ran, you have to understand the story they'd been telling themselves about who Mario would marry, what his life would look like, and what role his future wife would play in their carefully constructed world. Mario had dated before me, of course, but his previous relationships followed a pattern that I was too naive to recognize at first. There was Isabella Rodriguez, his high school sweetheart, whose family owned a successful chain of Cuban restaurants. They dated for 3 years, and Elsie still spoke about her with the kind of wistful affection usually reserved for deceased relatives. "Such a sweet girl," she'd say. "So respectful, so traditional. Her arroz con pollo was almost as good as mine." Then there was Sofia Mendez, who he'd met in college. She was studying education, planning to be an elementary school teacher, a career Elsie deemed perfect for a woman, because it was nurturing and would allow for flexibility when children came along. Sofia spoke fluent Spanish, attended Mass every Sunday, and never questioned Santos' family decisions. That relationship lasted 4 years and only ended when Sofia's family moved to Texas for her father's job. The pattern was clear. Mario was expected to choose a nice Cuban-American girl who would slot seamlessly into the family structure, who would defer to Elsie's authority, who would prioritize family over career, and who would raise the next generation of Santos' children to be just as loyal to the family hierarchy as their parents. I was the opposite of everything they'd been expecting, and from the moment Mario brought me home, I could see the shock and disappointment in their eyes. I wasn't just different, I was their worst nightmare. An independent, career-focused woman who had opinions, who asked questions, who didn't automatically defer to family authority. But there was something else, something deeper than just cultural differences or career conflicts. The Santos family had built their identity around the idea that they were better than other families, more loyal, more traditional, more successful. They wore their closeness like a badge of honor, their Sunday dinners like proof of their superiority over families that had lost their way in American individualism. My presence threatened that narrative. Here was their golden son, their heir apparent, choosing an outsider over the carefully vetted options they'd been grooming him toward. It wasn't just personal rejection. It was an indictment of their entire worldview. The first major incident happened during our engagement period, about 8 months before our wedding. Mario and I had been looking at houses, and we'd found a beautiful place in Coconut Grove, modern, airy, with a home office where I could work when I needed to be available for emergency calls. It was perfect for us, about 30 minutes from both our hospitals, in a neighborhood full of young professionals. When we announced our choice at Sunday dinner, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Elsie set down her coffee cup with the kind of careful precision that telegraphs danger. "Coconut Grove?" she said, as if I'd suggested we move to Mars. "But that's so far from family." Louis leaned back in his chair, studying us both. "When your cousin Miguel got married, they bought the house 2 streets over. Very convenient for babysitting, for family emergencies. Smart planning." Mario shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Mom, it's only 30 minutes. That's nothing in Miami traffic." 30 minutes might as well be 3 hours when you have small children, Elsie countered. "And what about Sunday dinners? What about holidays? What about when I need help with something?" I made the mistake of speaking up. There are plenty of ways to stay close as a family, even if we don't live in the same neighborhood. Technology makes everything easier now, and technology, Elsie repeated, like I'd suggested we communicate through smoke signals. "Is that how families stay connected in Oregon, Camille? Through technology?" The way she said Oregon made it sound like a foreign country, a place where families clearly didn't understand the importance of proximity and tradition. I felt Mario tense beside me, but he didn't defend me. He didn't point out that my family was close despite being spread across different states. He didn't mention that some of the happiest, most successful marriages we knew involved couples who lived their own lives while maintaining family connections. Instead, he said, "We're still looking at options." Nothing's decided yet. That was the first time I realized that in Mario's mind, our decisions were always tentative until they'd been approved by his family. We weren't partners making choices together. We were petitioners seeking approval from a higher authority. The house hunt dragged on for months. Every place we looked at was subjected to Santos family scrutiny. Too far from family. Too modern. Too expensive. Not in a good school district. Not appropriate for entertaining family. Finally, we settled on a house in Coral Gables, 15 minutes from the family home. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was what would bring peace. That became the pattern of our entire relationship. My preferences, my needs, my career considerations were always secondary to what would maintain harmony with his family. When I got a promotion that required occasional weekend work, Mario asked if I could turn it down because it would interfere with family time. When I wanted to take a vacation to see my parents in Oregon, he suggested we postpone it because Marion was going through a difficult breakup and needed family support. Each compromise felt small in isolation. What was one weekend? What was one postponed trip? What was choosing a different neighborhood? But taken together, they created a pattern, where I was always the one bending, always the one accommodating, always the one expected to understand that Santos family needs came first. The most telling incident happened the Christmas before Marion's engagement. My parents had flown in from Oregon to spend the holidays with us, their first visit to Miami. I was excited to show them around, to introduce them to Mario's family, to have both sides of our family together for the first time. But Elsie had other plans. That Christmas revealed everything I needed to know about my place in the Santos family hierarchy. But I was still too hopeful, too naive to see it clearly. My parents, David and Linda Kensington, are the kind of people who raised me to believe that love means making space for others, that families grow stronger when they welcome new members, that differences should be celebrated, not merely tolerated. They arrived on December 22nd, excited to finally meet Mario's family and experience a Miami Christmas. I'd planned everything carefully, a dinner at our house on Christmas Eve where both families could get to know each other, followed by Christmas Day at the Santos home for their traditional celebration. It seemed perfect, balanced, fair. 2 days before Christmas Eve, Elsie called. "Mijo," she said to Mario, using the Spanish endearment that always made me feel like an outsider in my own living room. "I've planned something special for Christmas Eve. The whole extended family is coming. Your tia Rosa, your cousin Miguel and his family, even your padrino from Cuba. It's going to be beautiful." I watched Mario's face change as she spoke. "But Mom, Camille's parents are here. We already planned?" "They're welcome too, of course," Elsie interrupted, though her tone suggested otherwise. "The more family, the better. But you know how important Christmas Eve is to us, how we've celebrated the same way for 20 years. Your father already bought the lechon, and I've been preparing for weeks." There it was, the ultimatum disguised as an invitation. Come to our celebration, on our terms, at our house, following our traditions, or be the family that broke 20 years of Santos Christmas tradition. My parents could attend, but as guests in someone else's celebration, not as equal participants in a shared family moment. Mario looked at me helplessly. "What do you think, babe?" What I thought was that this was exactly the kind of test I'd been subjected to for 4 years. What I thought was that my parents had traveled 3,000 miles to be with us, and they deserved better than being afterthoughts in someone else's family celebration. What I thought was that this was the moment for Mario to choose us, to choose the family we were building together, over the family that had shaped him. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Of course, your family traditions are important." Because that's what I always did. I chose peace over principles, accommodation over authenticity. I called my parents and explained the change in plans, watching their faces fall as they realized they'd be spending Christmas Eve with strangers who had made it clear they were obligations, not welcome additions. Christmas Eve at the Santos house was exactly what I'd feared. My parents, dressed nicely but not formally enough for the occasion, sat politely while 3 generations of Santos family members conducted conversations in rapid Spanish. Occasionally, someone would remember to translate, but mostly my parents, smiled and nodded, isolated by language and custom. The worst moment came during gift exchange. The Santos family had an elaborate system. Gifts were presented formally, with speeches about the recipient's accomplishments and importance to the family. When it was time for my parents to receive their gifts, Elsie handed them each a generic gift bag with a Santos Automotive baseball cap and a bottle of rum. "For our new family members," she announced, as if my parents were recent additions rather than people whose daughter had been married into this family for 3 years. No speech, no acknowledgement of who they were or what they meant to me. Just the kind of corporate swag you'd give to acquaintances. My father, ever gracious, stood up to thank her. "This is so thoughtful, Elsie. We really appreciate being included in your family traditions. Linda and I brought something for you too." But Elsie had already moved on to the next gift, dismissing my father mid-sentence with a wave of her hand. "Oh, how sweet. You can just put it under the tree." I watched my father's face close down, that polite mask he wore when he was deeply hurt, but too well-mannered to show it. My mother squeezed his hand, both of them understanding in that moment exactly where they stood in this family's hierarchy. Mario saw it too. I know he did because he flinched, but he didn't say anything. He didn't acknowledge the insult, didn't try to redirect attention back to my parents, didn't attempt to create space for their gift to be properly received. He just sat there, caught between his loyalty to his birth family and his love for me, and chose silence. That became the pattern of every family gathering, every holiday, every celebration for the next 3 years. The Santos family would plan events around their traditions, their timeline, their preferences, and I would accommodate. When I tried to suggest alternatives, maybe we could have Thanksgiving at our house one year, maybe we could start a new tradition that incorporated both families, I was met with hurt looks and comments about how some people didn't understand the importance of family traditions. The pregnancy issue made everything worse. After 2 years of marriage, the questions started. Subtle at first. Comments about how empty our guest room looked, how nice it would be to have little voices in the house. Then more direct. When were we planning to give Louis and Elsie grandchildren? Didn't we know they weren't getting any younger? When we started struggling with fertility, the scrutiny intensified. Elsie began making comments about how stress affected conception, how career-focused women sometimes had trouble prioritizing what really mattered. She shared stories about cousins who'd gotten pregnant immediately after the wives quit their demanding jobs. She suggested doctors, specialists, even a curandera who had supposedly helped several family members. Every failed pregnancy test became a family discussion. Every doctor's appointment was analyzed. Every treatment decision was subjected to Santos, family input. Mario, caught between medical privacy and family expectations, began sharing details I'd asked him to keep confidential. "Mom's just worried," he'd say when I complained. "She wants to help." But it didn't feel like help. It felt like surveillance, like judgment, like another way my inadequacy was being documented and discussed. Looking back, I can see that I spent years trying to solve the wrong problem. I kept thinking that if I could just prove my worth, demonstrate my commitment to family, show them how much I loved Mario, everything would change. I was treating their rejection like a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with enough effort, enough accommodation, enough sacrifice of my own needs. My first major attempt at integration came during my 3rd year of marriage. I decided to learn Spanish properly, not just the basic conversational phrases I'd picked up, but real fluency. I enrolled in an intensive course at the University of Miami, studied for hours every night after my hospital shifts, and practiced, with Spanish-speaking colleagues who were patient enough to help me. When I surprised the family by delivering my birthday toast to Louis entirely in Spanish, I thought I'd finally found the key. The room went quiet, and for a moment, I saw something that looked like approval in Elsie's eyes. Louis actually smiled and nodded appreciatively. Even Marion seemed impressed, but the victory was short-lived. Within weeks, the family had adjusted their expectations. Now that I could understand Spanish, they began speaking it exclusively around me, conducting entire conversations as if I weren't there. When I tried to participate, they'd switch to rapid, colloquial Spanish full of cultural references and family inside jokes that were designed to exclude me. My hard-won fluency became just another way to highlight how I didn't truly belong. My second attempt was through food. I convinced Elsie to teach me how to make some traditional family recipes, thinking that cooking together might create the bond we'd never developed. Every Saturday morning for 3 months, I drove to the Santos house and stood in Elsie's pristine kitchen, carefully measuring ingredients and taking notes as she demonstrated techniques passed down through generations. I learned to make perfect black beans, rice that never stuck to the pot, and ropa vieja that made Mario's eyes light up when he tasted it. I thought I was earning my place in the family tradition, becoming part of their cultural legacy. But at the next family gathering, when I offered to bring the ropa vieja I'd mastered, Elsie declined with a sweet smile. "Oh, that's so thoughtful, Mija, but I've already planned the menu. Maybe next time." There was never a next time. The recipes I'd learned became personal skills, not family contributions. I was allowed to cook their food for my husband in my own kitchen, but never trusted to represent their cuisine to the extended family. The third attempt nearly broke me. I tried to bridge the gap through religion. Despite being raised Episcopalian, I began attending Mass with the Santos family every Sunday. I sat through services in Spanish that I was only beginning to understand, followed along with rituals that felt foreign, and tried to find meaning in a tradition that wasn't mine. Mario was thrilled. "You don't know how much this means to Mom and Dad," he told me. "They've been praying that you'd find your way to the church." For 6 months, I never missed a Sunday. I even started staying after service for coffee and pastries in the church hall, making small talk with other parishioners who knew me as Mario's wife. I thought I was building community, showing commitment, proving that I could adapt to their values. Then came the morning I couldn't attend because I was called in for an emergency surgery. A 7-year-old with a burst appendix whose parents specifically requested me. I explained to Mario, asked him to tell his family why I was absent, and rushed to the hospital where I spent 4 hours saving a child's life. When I finally made it to Sunday dinner that evening, exhausted but grateful that the surgery had gone, well, Elsie greeted me with a disappointed shake of her head. "It's such a shame you missed Father Miguel's beautiful sermon about the importance of family commitment," she said. "He spoke directly about how we show love through consistency, through putting family first even when other things seem urgent." I stood there in my wrinkled scrubs, still smelling faintly of hospital antiseptic, having just spent my morning saving someone's child, and realized that in their eyes, I had once again failed to prioritize properly. No explanation would be good enough, no sacrifice would be recognized, no achievement would matter if it came at the cost of Santos family expectations. That night, I tried to talk to Mario about what had happened. "Your mother basically criticized me for saving a child's life," I said. "How is that putting family first?" He sighed, that tired sound I'd heard so many times before. "She didn't mean it like that, Camille. You know she supports your career. She just wishes you could have found coverage, could have planned better. Planned better for a burst appendix? Mario, emergencies don't follow family dinner schedules." I know. But you have to understand, consistency means a lot to them. When you commit to something, they expect you to follow through. Each failed attempt taught me the same lesson. The problem wasn't my effort, my commitment, or my willingness to change. The problem was that I was trying to earn a place that was never actually available to me. While I was exhausting myself trying to win over the Santos family, something else was happening in my professional life that should have been a source of pride and celebration. I was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams, building a career that any surgeon would envy, and making a real difference in the lives of children and families. But every achievement felt hollow when the people closest to me either ignored it or saw it as evidence of my misplaced priorities. In my 4th year of marriage, I was offered the position of Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Miami Children's Hospital. At 31, I would be the youngest person ever to hold that role and only the second woman in the hospital's 40-year history. The offer came after I'd successfully pioneered a new minimally invasive technique for correcting congenital heart defects, a procedure that reduced recovery time by 60% and had already been adopted by hospitals across the country. The technique had taken me 3 years to perfect. I'd spent countless hours in surgical simulations, worked with biomedical engineers to develop specialized instruments, and collaborated with colleagues from around the world to refine the approach. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging case. A 3-year-old girl named Sophia with a complex ventricular septal defect that traditional surgery would have required cracking open her entire chest. Using my new approach, I was able to repair her heart through 3 small incisions, each no bigger than a keyhole. Sophia was home within 5 days instead of the usual 3 weeks. Her parents cried when they saw her running around the hospital corridor just 48 hours after surgery. That case became the foundation for a research paper that would be cited by pediatric surgeons worldwide. When I told Mario the news about the promotion, his first reaction was pride. He picked me up and spun me around our kitchen, telling me how incredible I was, how much I deserved this recognition. For a moment, I felt like we were a team again, like he saw me the way he used to when we first met. But then came the questions. What kind of hours will you be working? Will you still be able to make Sunday dinners? What about when we have kids? Will this position be flexible enough for family time? I should have recognized the pattern by then. Mario's support was always conditional, always filtered through the lens of how my choices would affect his family's expectations. When I explained that the position would require some evening hours, some weekend availability, and occasional travel to conferences where I'd be presenting my research, I watched his enthusiasm deflate. Maybe you should ask if you can negotiate some of those requirements, he suggested. I mean, you're already successful. Do you really need all the extra responsibility? The irony wasn't lost on me. Mario's own career trajectory had involved exactly these kinds of sacrifices. He'd spent years working 80-hour weeks during his residency, had missed family gatherings for medical conferences, had prioritized his professional development over every other consideration. But when his wife's career demanded the same level of commitment, suddenly it became excessive, unnecessary, a threat to family stability. When we announced my promotion at the next Sunday dinner, the reaction was exactly what I'd come to expect. Polite congratulations followed by immediate concerns about how this would affect family time. Elsie asked if I'd considered turning down the position since we were still trying for children. Louis wondered aloud whether the stress of such a demanding job might be affecting our fertility struggles. It's wonderful that you're so accomplished, mija, Elsie said, using the Spanish endearment that always felt more patronizing than affectionate when it came from her lips. But sometimes women have to choose between career success and family happiness. You don't want to look back and regret missing out on what really matters. What really matters? As if saving children's lives was somehow less important than attending family barbecues. As if the parents who trusted me with their most precious possessions didn't matter. As if the research I was conducting that could help thousands of children in the future was just a hobby that was getting out of hand. The most devastating part was the way they discussed my work as if it were optional, as if my surgical skills were just an interesting side project rather than a calling that defined who I was. They would never dream of asking Mario to scale back his cardiology practice for family time. They celebrated every advancement in his career as proof of Santos family excellence. But my achievements were treated as potential obstacles to my real job as wife and future mother. The worst part was watching Mario nod along with these conversations. He'd worked just as hard to build his career in cardiology, put in just as many hours, traveled to just as many conferences. But his ambition was seen as noble, necessary, admirable. Mine was seen as selfish. The double standard became even more apparent when Mario was offered a fellowship position that would require him to spend 6 months in Cleveland, working with one of the country's leading cardiac surgeons. The family immediately rallied around this opportunity, discussing how I could take time off to visit him, how we could make the long-distance work, how important this would be for his professional development. No one suggested he should turn it down to focus on our marriage or our fertility treatments. 6 months into my new role, I was invited to present my research at the International Pediatric Surgery Conference in Barcelona. It was a huge honor. The keynote address to 3,000 surgeons from around the world. The invitation came with a personal note from the conference organizer, mentioning that my work was being hailed as revolutionary, that I was being recognized as one of the most promising young surgeons in the field. This was the kind of recognition that could change the trajectory of my entire career. The Barcelona conference was where careers were made, where research partnerships were formed, where the future of pediatric surgery was shaped. Being invited to give the keynote address at my age was unprecedented. When I showed Mario the invitation, I expected excitement, maybe even suggestions for extending the trip into a romantic getaway. Instead, I got a frown and a calendar check. "That's the same week as Marion's engagement party," he said. "You can't miss that. She's been planning it for months, and you know how important it is to Mom and Dad. Mario, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Marion will understand." "Will she? Because I don't think you understand how hurt she'd be if you missed her celebration for work." Again. As if my career was just a series of inconvenient obligations that interfered with what really mattered to his family. As if the little girl whose life I'd saved the week before was less important than cocktails and small talk with people who barely tolerated my presence. I ended up declining the Barcelona invitation. I told myself it was a compromise, that there would be other conferences, other opportunities. I attended Marion's engagement party, smiled for photos, made appropriate conversation, and pretended that standing in that backyard making small talk was exactly where I wanted to be instead of sharing groundbreaking research with colleagues who actually valued my contributions. But something shifted in me that night. Watching Marion's fiancé, Callum, talk adoringly about her part-time interior design business while I'd just sacrificed a career-defining moment, I realized the double standard would never change. Marion's creative pursuits were celebrated as charming and feminine. My life-saving medical career was seen as a threat to family harmony. That was when I started to understand that no amount of professional success would ever earn me respect in this family. Because they fundamentally didn't believe that a woman's career should matter as much as her availability to serve their needs. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in September, delivered to our house in an elegant cream envelope with Marion's name embossed in gold script. I knew what it was before I opened it. The formal wedding invitation we'd been expecting since Callum proposed 6 months earlier. But seeing it in print, seeing our names listed as Dr. Mario Santos and Mrs. Camille Santos, made everything feel suddenly real and urgent. The wedding was set for October 15th at the Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables. 300 guests, seated dinner, dancing until midnight. No expense spared for the Santos family princess. As I read through the details, I felt that familiar mixture of dread and obligation that had become my standard response to Major Santos. Family events. But this time was different. This time I was carrying a secret that changed everything. 2 weeks earlier, I'd gotten the call I'd been waiting for, and dreading, for over a year. Dr. Anderson from the fertility clinic, her voice carefully neutral as she delivered news that should have been joyful. Congratulations, Camille. Your test results are positive. You're pregnant. Pregnant. After 2 years of trying, of tests and procedures and consultations, of monthly disappointments and Santos family scrutiny, I was finally pregnant. Mario and I had dreamed about this moment, planned for it, prayed for it. It should have been the happiest news of our lives. But when Dr. Anderson told me I was 6 weeks along, my first emotion wasn't joy. It was terror, because I knew exactly when conception had occurred, and I knew what that timing meant for our marriage, our family, and everything I thought I understood about my life. The pregnancy had happened during that weekend in late August, when Mario had to fly to a cardiology conference in Chicago. I'd been scheduled to work, but my colleague Dr. Martinez had covered for me at the last minute when his own plans fell through. I'd found myself with an unexpected free weekend, the first in months. That's when I'd gotten the call from James Morrison, a pediatric surgeon I'd worked with during my residency who was now practicing in Boston. He was in Miami for a consultation and wanted to catch up over dinner. James had always been a good friend, someone who understood the pressures of our profession, who spoke my language in a way that Mario's family never would. We'd met at a quiet restaurant in South Beach, planning to grab a quick meal and reminisce about our residency days. But one glass of wine turned into 2, 1 hour turned into 3, and somewhere between discussing challenging cases and sharing our frustrations about work-life balance, something shifted. I won't make excuses for what happened next. I won't pretend it was just the wine, or that I was swept away by passion, or that it meant nothing. The truth is more complicated and more damning than that. For one night, I felt like myself again. I felt interesting, accomplished, valued for who I was rather than criticized for who I wasn't. James looked at me the way Mario used to, before his family's disapproval clouded his vision. We went back to his hotel room. It was a choice I made consciously, deliberately, with full knowledge of what I was doing and what it would mean. For 6 hours, I remembered what it felt like to be with someone who saw my career as an achievement rather than an inconvenience, who was impressed by my accomplishments rather than threatened by them. The next morning, I drove home filled with guilt and confusion, telling myself it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. I threw myself into work, tried to be a better wife, made extra efforts to connect with Mario when he returned from Chicago. For 2 weeks, I almost convinced myself I could forget it had ever happened. Then came the call from Dr. Anderson. The timing was unmistakable. Mario and I hadn't been intimate in the weeks before his Chicago trip. We'd both been working intense schedules, and our relationship had been strained by another fight about family obligations. But that night with James had been passionate, unguarded, unprotected. A moment of rebellion that had consequences I was only beginning to understand. Now, holding Marion's wedding invitation, I realized I was facing an impossible choice. The wedding was 6 weeks away. By then, I'd be 12 weeks pregnant, past the point where most people started sharing their news. If I attended the wedding, it would mean pretending to celebrate new beginnings while hiding the secret that could destroy everything. If I didn't attend, it would mean explaining why I was missing the most important Santos family event in years. But there was something else, something that made the decision even more complex. James had texted me 3 days after Dr. Anderson's call. A simple message. I can't stop thinking about that night in Miami. When can I see you again? I hadn't responded. I'd deleted the message and tried to pretend it didn't exist. But now, looking at this wedding invitation, I realized I was out of time. I could keep pretending everything was normal, show up to celebrate Marion's perfect love story while hiding the fact that my marriage was built on lies. Or I could find the courage to face the truth about what my life had become. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of internal turmoil and careful performance. Every morning, I woke up thinking this would be the day I told Mario about the pregnancy. Every evening, I went to bed having found another excuse to postpone the conversation. How do you tell your husband you're carrying a child that might not be his? How do you explain that the gift he's been praying for might actually be the evidence of your betrayal? I threw myself into wedding preparations as a way to avoid confronting the larger questions. I bought a dress, emerald green silk, that would hide any early pregnancy symptoms while still looking appropriate for such an elegant affair. I made appointments for hair and makeup. I researched gift options for Marion and Callum, settling on an expensive crystal vase that felt appropriately impersonal. I did all the things expected of a supportive sister-in-law while fighting waves of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. The worst part was Mario's excitement. He'd noticed small changes, that I was tired more often, that I'd stopped drinking wine with dinner, that I was more emotional than usual. But instead of connecting these symptoms to the possibility we'd been hoping for, he interpreted them through the lens of stress and overwork. "Maybe the stress is finally getting to you," he said one evening, rubbing my shoulders as I sat at our kitchen table pretending to review patient files. "You've been pushing yourself so hard with this new position. Maybe you should consider cutting back on some of your responsibilities. Always back to work. Even my secret pregnancy symptoms were somehow evidence that my career was too demanding, that I needed to reorganize my priorities." I wanted to scream at him that my stress had nothing to do with saving children's lives and everything to do with the impossible situation our marriage had become. "I'm fine," I said, the lie coming easily after years of practice. "Just tired." But I wasn't fine. I was drowning in a secret that grew heavier every day, and the wedding was approaching like a deadline I couldn't avoid. Every family gathering became a minefield of potential exposure. When Elsie commented that I looked peaked at Sunday dinner, I blamed it on a difficult surgery schedule. When Marion mentioned that I seemed distant during wedding planning discussions, I apologized and promised to be more engaged. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was working harder than ever to maintain the facade of being the perfect sister-in-law, just as I was planning to destroy it completely. I helped Marion choose centerpieces, attended her final dress fitting, participated in all the pre-wedding rituals while knowing that this would likely be the last Santos family event I'd ever attend. 2 weeks before the wedding, I finally made a decision. Not about what I would do with the pregnancy, not about whether I would tell Mario the truth, but about how I would handle the wedding itself. I would attend, play the role of supportive family member one last time, and use the event as a deadline for making the bigger decisions about my life. But I knew I needed help. Someone outside the Santos family circle who could give me perspective. I called my sister Rebecca in Portland, the one person who had always been honest with me about my marriage, even when I didn't want to hear it. "Camille?" Her voice was surprised when she answered. I rarely called during the week, and never in the middle of the day. "Is everything okay?" "I need to talk to someone," I said, closing my office door and sinking into my chair. "And I need you to promise me you won't judge what I'm about to tell you." The silence stretched for a moment. Rebecca had always been the practical one, the sister who saw situations clearly and gave advice whether you wanted it or not. But she was also fiercely loyal, and I knew that whatever I told her would stay between us. "What's going on?" I told her everything. The years of feeling excluded, the constant pressure to minimize my career, the way Mario had gradually stopped defending me to his family. I described the Christmas when my parents were treated like afterthoughts, the engagement party where I was publicly criticized for missing church to save a child's life, the Barcelona conference I'd turned down to maintain family peace. And then, my voice barely above a whisper, I told her about James and the pregnancy. Rebecca listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or concern. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Camille," she finally said, "what do you want to happen here?" It was such a simple question, But I realized no one had asked me that in years. Not what Mario wanted, not what his family expected, not what would maintain peace or preserve appearances. What did I want? I want to feel like myself again, I said. And as soon as the words were out, I knew they were true. I want to stop apologizing for who I am. I want to stop making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. And what about the baby? I don't know yet. But I know I can't keep living this lie, and I can't bring a child into this mess without knowing the truth. Rebecca was quiet again. Then, what are you going to do at the wedding? That was the question I'd been avoiding. Marion's wedding wasn't just a family celebration. It was a stage where the Santos family would be on display, where their values and traditions would be showcased for 300 guests. It was the perfect opportunity for them to demonstrate their unity, their success, their superiority to families that had lost their way. I'm going to go, I said slowly, the plan forming as I spoke. I'm going to play the perfect sister-in-law one last time, and then I'm going to stop pretending. What does that mean? I looked out my office window at the Miami skyline, at the city where I'd built a career I was proud of, where I'd saved countless lives, where I'd proven myself over and over again to everyone except the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Means I'm done trying to earn a place in a family that will never actually want me there. Rebecca and I talked for another hour, working through the practical considerations of what leaving would look like. She offered to fly down immediately, to be there for whatever came next. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. That evening, I started making quiet preparations. I researched divorce lawyers, looked into temporary housing options, began the mental process of separating my life from Mario's. I wasn't ready to take dramatic action yet, but I needed to know what my options were. I also did something else, something that felt both reckless and necessary. I responded to James's text. I've been thinking about you, too, I wrote. Can we talk soon? There's something you need to know. His response came within minutes. Call me anytime, day or night. As I put my phone away and looked around our perfectly appointed house, the Spanish tile Mario had insisted on, the family photos that documented years of me trying to fit in, the wedding china we'd registered for at Elsie's favorite store, I realized I was already gone. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, I was already building a different life in my mind. The wedding would be my farewell performance. After that, I would finally find the courage to stop acting. Every day, and the wedding was approaching, like a deadline I couldn't avoid. Every family gathering became a minefield of potential exposure. When Elsie commented that I looked peaked at Sunday dinner, I blamed it on a difficult surgery schedule. When Marion mentioned that I seemed distant during wedding planning discussions, I apologized and promised to be more engaged. 2 weeks before the wedding, I finally made a decision. Not about what I would do with the pregnancy, not about whether I would tell Mario the truth, but about how I would handle the wedding itself. I would attend, play the role of supportive family member one last time, and use the event as a deadline for making the bigger decisions about my life. But I knew I needed help, someone outside the Santos family circle who could give me perspective. I called my sister Rebecca in Portland, the one person who had always been honest with me about my marriage, even when I didn't want to hear it. Camille? Her voice was surprised when she answered. I rarely called during the week, and never in the middle of the day. Is everything okay? I need to talk to someone, I said, closing my office door and sinking into my chair. And I need you to promise me you won't judge what I'm about to tell you. The silence stretched for a moment. Rebecca had always been the practical one, the sister who saw situations clearly and gave advice whether you wanted it or not. What's going on? I told her everything. The years of feeling excluded, the constant pressure to minimize my career, the way Mario had gradually stopped defending. me to his family. And then, my voice barely above a whisper, I told her about James and the pregnancy. Rebecca listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or concern. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Camille," she finally said, "what do you want to happen here?" It was such a simple question, but I realized no one had asked me that in years. Not what Mario wanted, not what his family expected, not what would maintain peace or preserve appearances. What did I want? "I want to feel like myself again," I said, and as soon as the words were out, I knew they were true. I want to stop apologizing for who I am. I want to stop making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. And what about the baby? I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep living this lie, and I can't bring a child into this mess without knowing the truth. Rebecca was quiet again. Then, "What are you going to do at the wedding?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. Marion's wedding wasn't just a family celebration. It was a stage where the Santos family would be on display, where their values and traditions would be showcased for 300 guests. It was the perfect opportunity for them to demonstrate their unity, their success, their superiority to families that had lost their way. "I'm going to go," I said slowly, the plan forming as I spoke. "I'm going to play the perfect sister-in-law one last time, and then I'm going to stop pretending." "What does that mean?" I looked out my office window at the Miami skyline, at the city where I'd built a career I was proud of, where I'd saved countless lives, where I'd proven myself over and over again to everyone except the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. It means I'm done trying to earn a place in a family that will never actually want me there. The morning of Marion's wedding dawned clear and crisp. One of those perfect October days in Miami where the humidity finally breaks and you remember why people move to Florida. I stood in our bedroom at 6 a.m., looking at my emerald green dress, hanging on the closet door, and felt like I was preparing for battle rather than a celebration. Mario was already in the shower, humming some song I didn't recognize. He'd been in an unusually good mood all week, excited about seeing extended family members who were flying in from Cuba and Puerto Rico, looking forward to dancing and celebrating and showing off what he called our beautiful life to relatives who hadn't seen us since our own wedding. Our beautiful life. If only he knew how precarious it had become. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind cycling through possible scenarios for how the evening might unfold. Would I make it through the entire reception playing the dutiful wife and sister-in-law? Would I find a moment alone with Mario to finally tell him about the pregnancy? Would I have the courage to confront the larger issues in our marriage? Or would I chicken out and postpone the reckoning for another day? As I applied my makeup with extra care, trying to cover the dark circles under my eyes and add color to my pale cheeks, I thought about the gift that was already wrapped and sitting in our car. A crystal vase from Tiffany, expensive and impersonal. The kind of gift you give when you want to fulfill an obligation without revealing anything about yourself or your relationship to the recipients. But hidden in my purse was something else entirely. Something I'd been carrying around for 3 days, debating whether I had the courage to use it. A printed email that had arrived Wednesday morning. An email that changed everything I thought I knew about my place in the Santos family. The email was from Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, the head of pediatric surgery at Boston Children's Hospital. She was offering me the position of department chief, a role that would make me one of the youngest department heads at one of the most prestigious children's hospitals in the country. The salary was nearly double what I was making in Miami. The research opportunities were limitless. The chance to shape the future of pediatric surgery was everything I'd ever dreamed of professionally. But the timing of the offer felt like more than coincidence. Dr. Gonzalez mentioned that she'd been following my work for years, but that James Morrison had specifically recommended me for the position during a recent conversation about recruiting top talent. James, the man whose night with me had resulted in a pregnancy that could destroy my marriage, was now offering me a way out of the life that had been slowly suffocating me. I hadn't responded to the offer yet. I hadn't even told Mario about it. But I'd printed it out and folded it carefully, carrying it with me like a talisman, a reminder that there were other possibilities, other futures beyond the one I'd been trying so desperately to make work in. Miami. The drive to the Biltmore was quiet. Mario chatted about family members we'd see, reminded me of names I might forget, warned me that his great-aunt Carmen would probably ask intrusive questions about when we were planning to have children. I nodded and made appropriate responses while my stomach churned with nerves and nausea. "You've been so quiet lately," he said as we pulled into the hotel's circular driveway. "Are you okay? You're not getting sick, are you?" If only he knew. "I'm fine," I said, the automatic response I'd perfected over the past month. "Just thinking about how beautiful everything will be." The Biltmore lobby was already bustling with activity. Santos family members clustered near the elevators, speaking in animated Spanish, their voices echoing off the marble floors and ornate ceiling. I recognized most of them from previous family gatherings, cousins and aunts and uncles who had always been polite to me but never warm, who included me in group photos but excluded me from intimate conversations. Elsie appeared almost immediately, resplendent in navy blue lace, her hair styled in perfect waves, her jewelry catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. She kissed Mario on both cheeks and gave me a brief hug that felt more like a performance than genuine affection. "Mija," she said, stepping back to examine my appearance with the critical eye she usually reserved for floral arrangements and table settings. "You look tired. Are you feeling well?" There it was again, that slightly worried tone that somehow managed to sound both caring and accusatory. As if my appearance was a reflection on the family, as if looking anything less than perfect was a personal failing that might embarrass them in front of their guests. "I'm fine, Elsie. Just excited for Marion's big day." She studied me for another moment, then smiled that controlled smile I'd learned to dread. "Well, make sure you eat something at cocktail hour. You look like you've lost weight." I hadn't lost weight. If anything, early pregnancy had made my face slightly fuller, my body softer in ways that my fitted dress carefully concealed. But Elsie's comment wasn't really about my health. It was about control, about establishing from the first moment that nothing about me escaped her notice or evaluation. As we moved toward the elevator that would take us to the bridal suite where the women were gathering to help Marion prepare, I touched the folded email in my purse and wondered if tonight would be the last time I'd have to endure this particular form of loving criticism. The bridal suite was a symphony of controlled chaos. Marion sat in the center of it all, like a queen, holding court, her hair in perfect curls, her makeup artist putting the finishing touches on her flawless face. Around her, female family members bustled about with champagne glasses and last-minute touches to their own appearances, everyone speaking at once in a mixture of English and Spanish. I found myself relegated to the periphery, as usual. While Elsie fussed over the dress and Marion's cousins took endless selfies, I sat in a corner chair, sipping sparkling water and watching the performance of female Santos family bonding. They moved together like a well-rehearsed dance, each woman knowing her role, her place in the hierarchy, her part in the celebration. "Camille," Marion's voice cut through the chatter. "Come help me with my necklace. These clasps are impossible." I set down my water and moved to help her, grateful to have a purpose. The necklace was a family heirloom, diamonds and pearls that had belonged to Louis's mother, passed down through generations of Santos women. As I worked the delicate clasp, Marion caught my eye in the vanity mirror. "I'm so nervous," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the conversation around us. "What if I mess up the vows? What if I trip walking down the aisle?" For a moment, she looked like the little girl I remembered from early family gatherings, vulnerable and human rather than the polished princess she'd become. "You'll be perfect," I told her, meaning it. "Callum loves you, your family loves you, and you look absolutely stunning." She smiled, a real smile this time. Thank you. And Camille? I know Mom can be intense sometimes, but she really does care about you. She just shows it in weird ways. I finished with the necklace and stepped back, not trusting myself to respond. Honestly. Marian meant well, but she had no idea what it was like to be on the receiving end of Elsie's caring. She'd never been made to feel like an outsider in her own family, never had her choices questioned or her priorities judged. All done, I said instead. You look like a fairy tale princess. The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations and photo sessions. I smiled for pictures, complimented dresses, and made appropriate small talk while my mind raced with thoughts of the evening ahead. Every interaction felt loaded with subtext. Every conversation seemed to carry hidden meanings about family loyalty and proper behavior. The real tension began during the transfer to the ceremony space. As we moved through the hotel corridors, a small army of bridesmaids, family members, and wedding coordinators, I overheard a conversation between Elsie and her sister Rosa that made my blood run cold. She's been so distant lately, Elsie was saying in Spanish, her voice low but not low enough. Always working, never available for family events. I'm starting to wonder if she really understands what marriage means. Some women just aren't built for family life, Rosa replied. Too independent, too focused on themselves. Poor Mario is so patient with her. They were talking about me. I was sure of it. The timing, the context, the sympathetic tone when discussing Mario's supposed patience. It all pointed to me being the subject of their concern. I slowed my pace, letting other family members pass me while I processed what I'd heard. Too independent. Too focused on myself, not built for family life. After 6 years of trying to prove them wrong, after countless compromises and accommodations and attempts to fit into their vision of the perfect daughter-in-law, they still saw me as fundamentally flawed, fundamentally unsuited for the role I'd been trying so desperately to fill. By the time we reached the ceremony space, my hands were shaking. The cocktail reception was already in full swing, guests mingling in the hotel's beautiful courtyard, while a string quartet played classical music. Mario appeared at my side almost immediately, handsome in his black tuxedo, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. For the beautiful wife, he said, handing me a glass with a smile. You look incredible tonight. I stared at the champagne, knowing I couldn't drink it, knowing that refusing it would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. I'm not really in the mood for alcohol, I said. Could you get me some sparkling water instead? His brow furrowed slightly. Are you sure you're feeling okay? You've been off alcohol for weeks now. I'm fine, I said, perhaps too quickly. Just want to stay clear-headed for the evening. But Mario's attention had already shifted. Henry approached, us with his latest girlfriend, a sweet young woman named Sophia, who worked as a teacher and hung on Henry's every word. Within minutes, Mario was deep in conversation with his brother about work, family, and sports, while I stood beside them feeling invisible. The pattern continued throughout the cocktail hour. I was included in group conversations but never central to them. People asked polite questions about my work, but showed little interest in my answers. I was photographed with the family but positioned on the edges, always slightly outside the inner circle, and through it all, I kept thinking about those words, not built for family life. After everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd tried to become, they still saw me as an outsider who would never truly belong. That's when I realized tonight really would be my last performance as Mario's accommodating wife. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. Marian looked radiant as she walked down the aisle on Louis's arm, her dress flowing behind her like something out of a magazine. Callum's face when he saw her was pure joy, the kind of unguarded emotion that made everyone in the room remember why they believed in love in the first place. I sat in the 3rd row next to Mario, watching this display of perfect family unity, perfect love, perfect traditions being passed down through generations. The priest spoke in both English and Spanish, acknowledging the cultural heritage that was so important to the Santos family. Extended family members dabbed at their eyes with tissues. Even Louis, usually so controlled, seemed emotional as he placed Marian's hand in Callum's. But as I watched this fairy tale unfold, all I could think about was how none of it was real for me. I would never be the bride whose family celebrated her choices. I would never have in-laws who looked at my husband the way Callum's parents looked at Marian. I would never be fully embraced by this family, no matter how many years passed or how many compromises I made. The reception began with all the traditional fanfare. The DJ introduced the wedding party as they entered the ballroom, each couple dancing briefly before joining the head table. Mario and I were included in this procession. After all, we were family. But I felt like an actress playing a role, smiling and waving while feeling completely disconnected from the celebration around me. Dinner was an elaborate affair, course after course of perfectly prepared food that I could barely taste. The pregnancy nausea didn't help, but mostly I was too nervous about what was coming to have any appetite. I made small talk with the guests at our table, smiled at the right moments, laughed at the appropriate jokes, and counted down the minutes until the speeches would begin, because I knew what was coming. I'd attended enough Santos family events to know the pattern. Louis would speak first, offering wisdom and family history. Then Callum's father would say a few words about welcoming Marian into their family. Henry would deliver a humorous best man speech about growing up with his sister. And then Mario, as the eldest son, would give the final family speech. Mario had been working on his speech for weeks, writing and rewriting, practicing in front of our bathroom mirror. He'd asked for my input a few times, and I'd offered suggestions, while knowing that nothing I said would really matter. The speech would be about Santos family values, about the importance of tradition, about how Marian had found the perfect partner who understood what family meant. What I hadn't expected was what Mario would say about me. The speeches began exactly as I'd predicted. Louis spoke about watching his little girl grow into a strong, beautiful woman who had chosen a man worthy of the Santos name. Callum's father welcomed Marian into their family with warm words about the gift of gaining a daughter. Henry made everyone laugh with stories about Marian's childhood determination and perfectionism. Then Mario stood up, microphone in hand, looking handsome and confident in his tuxedo. The room fell quiet, 300 guests turning their attention to the golden son of the Santos family. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom. "It's an honor to speak on behalf of the Santos family tonight, as we celebrate my sister Marian and welcome Callum into our family." He spoke beautifully about growing up with Marian, about watching her develop into the remarkable woman she'd become. He talked about Callum's character, his dedication to family, his understanding of what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. And then came the part that destroyed me. "As I look around this room tonight," Mario continued, "I see what family really means. I see commitment, loyalty, and the willingness to put family first, even when it's difficult. Some people understand this naturally, and some people need time to learn it." His eyes found mine across the room, and I felt my heart stop. My wife Camille has been learning what it means to be part of a family like ours. It hasn't always been easy for her. She comes from a very different background, with different priorities. But I'm proud to say that she's finally starting to understand that success isn't just about individual achievement. It's about what you contribute to the people who love you. The room erupted in polite applause. People smiled and nodded, thinking they'd just heard a loving tribute to a wife who was growing and adapting. But I heard something else entirely. Heard a man publicly acknowledging that I was deficient, that I needed to be taught how to love properly, that my different priorities were something that required correction. I heard a husband telling 300 people that my success was less important than my service to his family. I heard the final confirmation that I would never, ever be enough for them as I was. As the applause died down and Mario continued his speech, I felt something inside me break. Not with sadness, but with clarity. 6 years of trying to prove my worth. 6 years of shrinking myself to fit their expectations. 6 years of believing that love meant enduring humiliation. And this was what I had to show for it. A public acknowledgement that I was still failing their test. Mario finished his speech to thunderous applause. I watched him smile and nod, accepting congratulations from family members who patted his back and told him how perfectly he'd captured what family meant. He was glowing with pride, basking in the approval of his parents and the admiration of 300 guests who thought they'd just witnessed a beautiful tribute to marriage and growth. But as he made his way back to our table, something in my face must have warned him that all was not well. His smile faltered slightly when he saw my expression, and he leaned down to whisper in my ear, "Are you okay? You look pale." I looked up at him, this man I'd loved for 7 years, this man who had just publicly humiliated me while thinking he was being generous, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind of calm that comes when you finally stop fighting a current and let it carry you where it was always meant to take you. "I need some air," I said, standing slowly and smoothing my dress. "I'll be right back," but I knew I wouldn't be back. At least, not as the same person who had walked into this ballroom. I made my way through the crowded reception hall, past tables of guests still buzzing about the speeches, past the dance floor where Marian and Callum were swaying to their first dance as husband and wife. No one seemed to notice my departure. Why would they? I was just the wife who was finally learning what family meant. The hotel lobby was quieter, populated mostly by business travelers and late-arriving guests. I found a secluded corner with a comfortable chair and pulled out my phone. My hands were surprisingly steady as I scrolled through my contacts and found the number I was looking for. James answered on the second ring. "Camille, is everything okay?" Even through the phone, his voice was warm, concerned, real in a way that reminded me why I'd been drawn to him in the first place. "I'm at my sister-in-law's wedding," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "And I just realized something important." "What's that?" "I don't want to be here anymore, not just at this wedding, in this life." There was a pause. Then, "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" I looked around the elegant hotel lobby, thought about the ballroom full of people celebrating a love that looked nothing like what I'd been living, thought about the pregnancy I was carrying and the job offer folded in my purse. "James, are you serious about that position in Boston?" "Dead serious. Dr. Gonzalez has been waiting for your answer. The offer stands exactly as we discussed." "And are you serious about us? About wanting to see where this could go?" Another pause, longer this time. "Camille, I've thought about you every day since that night. I know the timing is complicated. I know there are things we need to figure out. But yes, I'm serious about us." I closed my eyes and made the decision that would change everything. I'll be in Boston by the end of the month. "What about Mario? What about your life in Miami?" "My life in Miami isn't really mine," I said. "It's a performance I've been giving for 6 years, and I'm tired of pretending." We talked for a few more minutes, making tentative plans, discussing logistics, acknowledging the complications ahead. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. I walked back toward the ballroom, but stopped when I reached the entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see the reception in full swing. Mario was at our table, talking animatedly with his cousins, probably still receiving compliments on his speech. Marian was dancing with her new husband, radiant with joy. Elsie and Louis were holding court at the head table, the picture of proud parents. They all looked so happy, so complete, and none of them had noticed I was gone. I pulled the job offer from my purse and unfolded it carefully. Then I walked to the reception desk and asked for a pen and envelope. Mrs. Santos? The desk clerk recognized me from check-in. Is everything all right? Everything's perfect, I said, and meant it. Could I have some hotel stationery as well? It took me 10 minutes to write the letter. I kept it simple, direct, honest. No accusations, no anger, just the truth about what I needed and why I couldn't find it in our marriage. I mentioned the pregnancy. He deserved to know, even if I wasn't sure what would come next. I enclosed the job offer as explanation for where I'd be going. At the end, I wrote, I hope someday you'll understand that this isn't about giving up on family. It's about finally choosing the family I want to build for myself. I sealed the letter in the hotel envelope and walked back, toward the ballroom. The dancing had begun in earnest now, the formal part of the evening giving way to celebration. I could see Mario on the dance floor with Marion, spinning his sister around while she laughed with pure joy. I handed the envelope to Henry, who was standing near the bar with his girlfriend. Could you give this to Mario in about an hour? I asked. It's important, but not urgent enough to interrupt the dancing. Henry nodded, tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket without question. Sure thing, Camille. Everything okay? Everything's exactly as it should be, I said. And then I walked out of the Biltmore Hotel, out of my marriage, and toward the life I was finally ready to claim. I drove, home in complete silence. No music, no radio, just the sound of my own breathing and the hum of the Tesla's electric motor. The roads were mostly empty at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, and I felt like I was moving through a different world entirely, one where I was no longer Mrs. Mario Santos, no longer the struggling daughter-in-law, no longer the woman who apologized for taking up too much space. Our house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. Same Spanish tile roof, same perfectly manicured lawn, same architectural details that Mario had insisted were classic Miami style. But now it felt like a museum of a life I was no longer living, full of artifacts from a marriage that had ended. The moment I walked out of that ballroom, I changed out of my emerald dress and into jeans and a comfortable sweater, moving through our bedroom like I was packing for a business trip rather than ending my marriage. I wasn't ready to take everything. That conversation would come later, after lawyers and difficult discussions and the messy process of untangling 6 years of shared life. But I needed enough clothes for a few weeks, my important documents, and some personal items that would help me remember who I was before I became half of Mario and Camille. The most important thing was in my bedside drawer, the business card Dr. Patricia Gonzalez had included with her job offer, along with her personal cell phone number written on the back. Call me anytime, she'd written. Day or night. This opportunity won't wait indefinitely, but I understand that life changes take time. Life changes take time. If only she knew how quickly everything could shift. I was folding clothes into my suitcase when my phone rang. Mario's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I hesitated. Part of me, the part that had spent 6 years trying to smooth over conflicts and maintain peace, wanted to answer, to explain, to somehow make this easier for him. But I knew that conversation would only pull me back into the familiar pattern of justifying my choices, defending my needs, allowing myself to be talked out of what I knew was right. So I let it ring. The second call came 5 minutes later, then a third, then a text. Camille, Henry gave me your letter. Where are you? We need to talk about this. Another text. I don't understand what happened tonight. I thought my speech was good. Did I say something wrong? And then, please come back. Whatever this is, we can work through it. I turned off my phone and continued packing. By midnight, I had 3 suitcases in my car and a plan. I would drive to my hotel. I'd already booked a room at a boutique place in South Beach, somewhere the Santos family would never think to look for me. Tomorrow, I would call Dr. Gonzalez and formally accept the position in Boston. I would find a real estate agent to help me find an apartment, preferably in a neighborhood where I could walk to work and build a life that belonged entirely to me. But first, I had to leave something behind. I went to Mario's home office, the room where he kept his diplomas and awards, where he'd practiced his wedding speech in front of the mirror above his desk. On his keyboard, I placed my wedding ring and the house keys. No note this time. The letter I'd given Henry had said everything that needed saying. The ring caught the light from his desk lamp as I set it down, the diamonds sparkling the way they had 6 years ago when he'd proposed in that restaurant, overlooking Biscayne Bay. I'd been so happy that night, so certain that love would be enough to bridge any differences between us. I'd believed that marriage meant finding someone who would choose you, defend you, see you clearly and love you anyway. I wasn't angry at Mario, not really. I understood now that he'd been shaped by his family just as much as I'd been shaped by mine. The difference was that my family had taught me that love meant making space for someone else to grow, while his family had taught him that love meant bringing people into line with established expectations. Neither of us was wrong exactly. We were just fundamentally incompatible in ways that 6 years of trying couldn't fix. As I walked through our house one last time, I thought about the pregnancy I was carrying and the impossible questions it raised. Would I tell Mario the truth about paternity? Would I raise this child alone? Or would James want to be involved? How do you explain to a child that they were conceived during the breakdown of one relationship and might be raised in the context of another? I didn't have answers to any of those questions yet, but for the first time in years, I felt capable of finding them. For the first time in years, I felt like the decisions about my life and my future were actually mine to make. The drive to South Beach took 20 minutes. I checked into my hotel room, unpacked enough clothes for the next few days, and sat on the bed looking out at the ocean. Somewhere across the city, Mario was probably still trying to call me. Somewhere, the Santos family was trying to make sense of what had happened to their carefully ordered world. But here, in this room that smelled like sea salt and new beginnings, I finally felt like I could breathe. I slept better that night than I had in months, waking up to sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains and the sound of waves outside my window. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a knot in my stomach, didn't immediately start calculating how to navigate another day of walking on eggshells around the Santos family expectations. When I finally turned my phone back on around 9 a.m., I had 47 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most were from Mario, ranging from confused to angry to pleading. But there were also messages from Henry, from Marion, even from Elsie, a coordinated family response that felt both predictable and exhausting. The message that surprised me, though, was from an unknown number with a Boston area code. Camille, this is Dr. Gonzalez. James mentioned you might be ready to discuss the position. I'm actually in Miami for a conference this weekend and would love to meet in person if you're available. No pressure, just coffee and conversation about what this opportunity could look like. The timing felt like more than coincidence. I'd just blown up my life, and here was the person offering me a new one, practically on my doorstep. We met at a quiet cafe in Coral Gables, ironically just a few miles from the Santos compound where I'd spent so many uncomfortable Sunday dinners. Dr. Gonzalez was everything I'd hoped. Brilliant, direct, passionate about pediatric surgery in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with medicine in the first place. James tells me you've been working on some innovative techniques for congenital heart defects, she said over our second cup of coffee. The outcomes data from your last 50 cases is remarkable. For an hour, we talked about surgery, about research, about the future of pediatric medicine. She described the department at Boston Children's, the resources available, the collaborative environment where innovation was encouraged, rather than seen as a threat to established hierarchies. Can I ask you something personal? She said finally. James mentioned that you're going through some life changes. Are you sure this is the right time for such a big move? I thought about how to answer that. How do you explain that your life changes aren't obstacles to overcome but liberation to embrace? Dr. Gonzalez, I've spent 6 years trying to make myself smaller so other people could feel more comfortable. I've turned down opportunities, compromised my ambitions, and apologized for being too focused on saving children's lives. This move isn't happening despite my life changes. It's happening because of them. She smiled, the kind of smile that told me she understood exactly what I meant. In that case, I think Boston is going to be perfect for you. We shook hands on a start. Date of November 15th, 3 weeks away. Enough time to wrap up my cases in Miami, find an apartment in Boston, and begin the process of rebuilding my life from scratch. I was walking back to my car when my phone rang again. This time it was Mario, and something made me answer. Camille. Thank God. Where are you? I've been going crazy. His voice was raw, exhausted. I could picture him in our kitchen, probably unshaven, still wearing yesterday's clothes, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the kind of frantic energy that comes from a sleepless night. I'm safe, Mario. That's all you need to know right now. That's all I need to know? Camille, you're my wife. You disappeared from my sister's wedding and left me a letter saying you're leaving me. I think I need to know a little more than you're safe. There was an edge to his voice that I recognized. The Santos family entitlement creeping in, the assumption that I owed him explanations, that my choices required his approval. Mario, did you mean what you said in your speech last night? What? Of course I meant it. Every word. Then you meant it when you told 300 people that I needed to learn what family means, that I come from a different background with different priorities, that I'm finally starting to understand that my individual achievements matter. Less than what I contribute to your family? Silence. Then, Camille, I wasn't criticizing you. I was showing people how much you've grown, how much you've adapted, how much I've shrunk, you mean. That's not fair, isn't it? Mario, do you even remember the woman you married? Do you remember what you used to love about me? Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. I remember thinking you were the smartest person I'd ever met. I remember being proud of your strength, your independence. And when did you stop being proud of those things? I didn't stop. You did. The moment your family made it clear that those qualities were problems to be solved, rather than gifts to be celebrated. And you chose their comfort over my dignity, over and over again, until I started to believe that maybe I really was too much, too demanding, too focused on the wrong things. I could hear him crying on the other end of the line, and part of me wanted to comfort him, to take back the words that were finally giving voice to 6 years of accumulated hurt. Camille, I love you. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, Mario, I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between us, followed by a silence so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. You're… what? I'm pregnant. And before you start celebrating, you should know that the timing means there's a chance this baby isn't yours. The silence that followed my revelation lasted so long I thought Mario had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. What do you mean it might not be mine? I was standing in the parking lot of the cafe, surrounded by the ordinary bustle of a Sunday afternoon in Coral Gables, families heading to brunch, couples walking dogs, people living their normal lives, while mine exploded into 1,000 pieces. I leaned against my car and told him the truth. All of it. James, the conference weekend, the loneliness that had driven me to seek connection with someone who saw me as valuable rather than problematic. The timing of the pregnancy, the impossible mathematics of conception, the secret I'd been carrying for weeks while watching him plan for a future that might be built on a lie. When I finished, the silence returned. Then, unexpectedly, Mario laughed. Not with humor, but with the kind of broken sound people make when reality finally breaks through their defenses. 6 years, he said. 6 years I've been trying to make this work, trying to keep everyone happy, trying to balance my family's expectations with your needs. And I've been drowning, I finished. And that night with James was the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. So this is my fault? I drove you to cheat because I didn't defend you enough at Sunday dinners? The accusation stung because it was both fair and unfair, true and incomplete. Mario, this isn't about fault. It's about the fact that we became different people than the ones who fell in love 7 years ago. You became someone who needed his family's approval more than his wife's happiness. I became someone who was so starved for validation that I sought it elsewhere. But you could have talked to me. You could have told me how bad things were. I tried. For years I tried. Every time I brought up feeling excluded, you minimized it. Every time I talked about your family's treatment of me, you made excuses for them. Every time I suggested we needed to set boundaries, you told me I was being too sensitive. I heard him take a shaky breath. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I could just keep the peace long enough, everyone would eventually come around. And I thought if I could just be perfect enough, accommodating enough, small enough, I could earn a place in your family. We were both trying to solve the wrong problem. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd had in years. Mario talked about the pressure he'd felt from childhood to be the perfect son, the way his family's approval had become his measure of self-worth. He admitted that he'd seen my independence as a threat to the family harmony he'd been taught to preserve above everything else. I talked about the slow erosion of my confidence, the way I'd begun to question my own perceptions, the exhaustion of constantly performing a version of myself that felt foreign and uncomfortable. I keep thinking about that night we got engaged, Mario said. You were so excited about the hospital position you'd just been offered, the research you wanted to do. You had all these plans, all these dreams. When did I stop encouraging those dreams? When your mother made it clear that my dreams were competing with her vision of what your wife should be. And I let her. You did. We talked about the pregnancy, about the impossible situation it created, about the fact that regardless of paternity, this child would be born into the aftermath of our marriage's collapse. Mario's voice cracked when he admitted that part of him had been secretly relieved by our fertility struggles because it delayed the pressure to raise children the way his family expected. I watch how my parents interact with Marion's kids, he said. All that judgment, all those expectations about behavior and achievement and loyalty. I realized I didn't want to put a child through what you've been going through. Then why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you defend me? Because I didn't know how to choose you without losing them, and I thought I could have both if I just managed the situation carefully enough. But you can't manage love, Mario. You can't negotiate your way to acceptance. Either people want you in their lives as you are, or they don't. The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, we were both crying. Not for the loss of what we'd had, but for the recognition of what we'd never been able to build. We'd loved each other, but we'd loved the idea of each other more than the reality. We'd tried to force compatibility where fundamental differences existed. What happens now? Mario asked. Now we both get to figure out who we are when we're not trying to be what other people need us to be. And the baby? I don't know yet. I need to know the truth about paternity first. After that, we'll figure out what's best for everyone involved, including James? Including James. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. Not because the conversation had been easy, but because it had been real. For the first time in years, Mario and I had talked to each other as individuals rather than as representatives of competing expectations. It was the closest thing to love we'd shared in a long time, and it was also clearly goodbye. Moving to Boston happened faster than I'd expected. Within 2 weeks, I'd found a furnished apartment in Back Bay, just 20 minutes from Boston Children's Hospital, in a neighborhood full of young professionals who worked too many hours and ordered takeout more than they cooked. It was the opposite of Miami in every way. Cold instead of humid, urban instead of suburban, full of people who minded their own business instead of managing everyone else's. I loved it immediately. The paternity test results came back on my third day, in Boston. I'd driven to a clinic in a neighborhood where I was sure I wouldn't run into anyone I knew, paid cash, and waited for what felt like the longest week of my life. When the envelope arrived at my new apartment, I sat on my unfamiliar couch in my unfamiliar city and opened it with trembling hands. James was the father. The relief I felt surprised me. Not because I wanted Mario to be excluded from parenthood, but because the uncertainty had been the hardest part. Now, at least, I could move forward with clarity instead of questions. I called James first. He was in surgery, but called me back. Within an hour. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately. "You sounded shaky in your message." "I'm pregnant with your child," I said without preamble. "The test results came back today." Silence. Then, "How do you feel about that?" It was such a perfectly James question, focused on my emotional state rather than the logistics, concerned with my well-being rather than his own shock. It reminded me why I'd been drawn to him in the first place. "Terrified," I said honestly, "and excited, and completely overwhelmed. Do you want me to come over? I can be there in 20 minutes. We spent the evening talking about the future, about what kind of parents we wanted to be, about how to build something healthy from such complicated beginnings." James was thoughtful, present in a way that Mario had never been. He asked about my dreams for the baby, my concerns about balancing motherhood with my career, my thoughts about how we could create stability for a child who would be born into an unconventional situation. "I don't expect anything from you," I told him at one point. "I know this wasn't planned, and I know you didn't sign up for suddenly becoming a father with someone you barely know. Camille," he said, taking my hands, "I've thought about you every day since Miami. I recommended you for this job because I wanted you close, wanted a chance to see if what happened between us was real or just a moment of escape. This baby doesn't complicate that. It accelerates it. And I'm ready for that if you are." The conversation with Mario was harder. I called him the next evening, after I'd had time to process the results and think about what they meant for all of us. "It's not yours," I said simply when he answered. "I know," he said, which surprised me. "I think I knew when you first told me about the timing. I just wasn't ready to accept it." "How do you feel?" "Relieved," he admitted. "Is that terrible?" "I feel relieved that I don't have to figure out how to co-parent with someone who's building a completely different life. Relieved that this baby won't grow up caught between two worlds that don't understand each other." We talked about divorce proceedings, about dividing our shared assets, about how to tell his family about the end of our marriage. Mario had already started individual therapy, he told me, trying to understand how he'd lost himself so completely in his family's expectations. "They're not taking it well," he said about his parents' reaction to our separation. "Mom keeps asking what she did wrong, what we could have done differently to make you feel more welcome. And what do you tell her?" The truth. That feeling welcome isn't something you can manufacture. Either someone belongs in your family or they don't, and pretending otherwise just makes everyone miserable. Work became my sanctuary. Boston Children's Hospital was everything Dr. Gonzalez had promised. Innovative, collaborative, focused on pushing the boundaries of what was possible in pediatric medicine. My colleagues treated me as an equal from day one, valued my experience and expertise, and supported my pregnancy rather than seeing it as evidence of misplaced priorities. I was leading a team developing new protocols for fetal cardiac surgery, work that could revolutionize how we treated children with congenital heart defects. The research was challenging, intellectually stimulating, and meaningful in ways that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with medicine in the first place. By my second month in Boston, I felt like myself again. Not the version of myself I'd performed for the Santos family, not the accommodating wife who apologized for taking up space, but the ambitious, passionate, unapologetically driven woman I'd been before I learned to shrink myself for other people's comfort. James and I were taking things slowly, building a relationship alongside a pregnancy, learning each other's rhythms and preferences and dreams. He came to my prenatal appointments, helped me paint the nursery in my apartment, and talked to my growing belly about surgical techniques and medical innovations in a way that made me laugh and cry at the same time. "This baby is going to be a genius," I told him one evening as we assembled a crib in what would become the nursery. "This baby is going to know they're wanted," he replied. "That's more important than genius." For the first time in years, I was building a life that felt authentically mine. My daughter Emily was born on a snowy March morning in Boston, 6 months after I walked out of Marion's wedding reception. She arrived 3 weeks early, as if she was as eager to start her new life as I had been to start mine. James was there for every moment, holding my hand through contractions, crying when she took her first breath, promising her that she would always be enough exactly as she was. As I held her for the first time, looking into those perfect dark eyes that looked so much like her father's, I thought about all the choices that had led to this moment, the compromises that had slowly eroded my sense of self, the night of rebellion that had given me clarity, the courage to walk away from a life that was never truly mine, and the decision to build something new from the ashes of what had come before. 6 months later, I got an unexpected call. Marion's voice on my voicemail was hesitant, almost shy. "Camille, it's Marion. I know this is probably weird, and I'm not even sure you'll want to talk to me, but I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I heard about the baby, and I wanted to congratulate you. I also wanted to apologize. I don't think I ever really understood what it was like for you and our family, but I'm starting to see it now. Could we maybe talk sometime?" When I called her back, she told me that my departure had created ripples in the Santos family that were still spreading. Mario's honesty about our marriage had forced difficult conversations about family dynamics, about the difference between loyalty and love, about whether their closeness was actually healthy or just habitual. "Callum and I have been in counseling," she said. "Not because we're having problems, but because watching what happened with you and Mario scared us. We realized we never really talked about what we each needed from our families, what boundaries we should set, how to make sure our marriage stays ours." She told me that Elsie had been devastated by my leaving, not because she missed me, but because she genuinely couldn't understand what she'd done wrong. "She keeps saying she tried to include you, that she treated you like family. She really doesn't see it." "And do you see it?" I asked. "I'm starting to. I think I always knew you were different from what they expected, but I thought that was your problem to solve, not theirs to accept. I never questioned whether their expectations were fair." We talked for an hour, and by the end, something had shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, and certainly not a desire to return to the old dynamic, but understanding. Marion was beginning to see her family the way I had always seen them. Loving but controlling, close but conditional. And that recognition was changing how she navigated her own marriage. 3 years have passed since that night at the Biltmore Hotel. Emily is walking now, talking in full sentences, displaying the kind of fierce independence that I recognize in myself and that James encourages rather than fears. We've been married for 2 years, a small ceremony in Boston with my family, James's family, and a few close friends. No elaborate productions, no family politics, just 2 people choosing each other with full knowledge of who they were becoming together. I still think about Mario sometimes. He remarried last year to a woman named Ana, who grew up in Miami, speaks perfect Spanish, and fits seamlessly into the Santos family dynamic. From what I hear through mutual friends, She's happy there in ways I never could have been. And he's happy, too, in ways he couldn't be with someone who challenged the foundations of everything he'd been taught about family and love. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the way things ended, if I wish I'd tried harder to make my first marriage work, if I feel guilty about the affair that precipitated everything. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain I caused. I regret the lies I told and the secrets I kept. I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to be honest about what I needed. But I don't regret the outcome. Because here's what I learned that night when I walked out of that ballroom. You cannot love someone into seeing your worth. You cannot compromise yourself into belonging. You cannot shrink small enough to fit into a space that was never designed for you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the people who think they love you, is to stop pretending to be someone you're not. Sometimes the healthiest families are the ones you choose rather than the ones you're born into. Sometimes breaking something that looks perfect from the outside is the only way to build something that actually works. My daughter will grow up knowing that she is loved for who she is, not who she might become. She will understand that her dreams matter, that her voice deserves to be heard, that her worth is not determined by other people's approval. And if someday she finds herself in a situation where she has to choose between being accepted and being authentic, I hope she remembers the story of the night her mother finally chose herself. Because that choice, the choice to walk away from what doesn't serve you and toward what does, that's not giving up on love. That's finally understanding what love actually means. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.